Hello, my name is Anna Klug,
And I'm Zeke McClure.
and this is our dyadic intersectionality interview for Dr. Dorgan's intercultural communications class at East Tennessee State University.
This project meets the requirements for a course and is for educational purposes only. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so first question. So Zeke, in our 2019 intercultural communications course at ETSU, we discussed social locations and identities. Thinking about those social locations, how would you describe yourself?
Well, to be short and concise, I would describe myself as white, male in both sex and gender, and upper to middle class.
Okay, gotcha.
What about you?
I would say the same for me. In my paper, I discussed that the three social locations that I chose were race, gender, and class. And so I don't necessarily ascribe myself to those terms, when I think of myself. But through the eyes of intersectionality, I think those are the things that affect me the most in my day-to-day life would be
Yes,
race, gender, and
I
class.
would agree. We sort of have the privilege of being able to not think about those on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So those aren't characteristics that we would say define who we are. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I know that we've discussed that in class before because, social locations, they're inseparable. Like they all work together, but they're all also like their own distinct things. And honestly, like, especially through taking the course, I realized that I don't even have to think about that kind of stuff. I know we did that at the beginning of the semester. We had to rank like what we're aware of and what we're not aware of. And I'm honestly not very aware of my race, gender, and class, but I'd say that those are the things that affect me the most significantly. Do you agree? Or?
Yeah, I would agree. All of these physical things I don't really care about.
Right. It's not something I have to think about, which I guess is a privilege that we can probably get into later on.
So if an alien or something, if they were to come to Earth and they were to ask you to describe your life in sort of the characteristics that we chose for our papers, what would you say to them?
Goodness. I mean, like I said before, it would be very difficult for me to describe my entire life just in terms of my race, gender, and class. I almost felt constrained in the assignment. But definitely, like, in terms of race, I am a white person, and in terms of gender, I identify as female. And in terms of class, I would say I'm probably upper middle class. And those three things are very distinct from each other, but I think they all do kind of work together. I would hope that an alien would be able to understand what I mean by that, because I know they probably don't have to deal with race and things of that nature. But yeah, I would just say that those create different oppressions and also mostly privileges for me, but for other people definitely it creates a whole different world for them. So what would you say to the alien?
Well, first of all, I do agree with your point about it not really having much of a role in who I am as a person, but if I were to be talking to these socially conscious aliens then I'd sort of talk less about myself and more about how my characteristics have played a role throughout history. I would sort of tell them that humanity's priorities haven't always been straight. There have been oppressions based on race, gender, and class, which we would think of as insignificant characteristics now, but it wasn't always like that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's also like, as you were saying that, it made me think like, it's weird because, I mean, do you really think like, we don't think in terms of race. Like in America, we see white as kind of the superior race. That seems to happen here. But I guess it would be important for you to bring in the culture of just our country to those aliens if you were to talk to them. Because like in other countries, I'm sure it would be different. And how, class and gender and stuff, how does that play out across other cultures aside from our own?
And even though currently in our history, there's only a small minority of people who would say, oh yeah, white people are superior and stuff like that.
Right.
But even though it is a minority of people, people still have biases, and that plays into the culture.
Yeah.
And sort of plays into what place someone can be in society.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be such a weird thing to put into words, like the rules of our society and how we align ourselves. Like, so in this culture, like white means superior, and like this is like, so I'm on this end of the spectrum. I'm on the like more upper class end of the spectrum, but I'm not too high up. Like I'm upper middle class.
I mean, I don't even know if you could write the rules of a culture, being that every single person would write it differently.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, it's almost like just difficult to talk about. Like when people are talking about it in class, I'm like, what are we even doing? Like you can't even, like you said, you can't write them down, but they're still there. And we know that the rules are there.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to like,
And everyone thinks the rules are different.
Yes, exactly. Like, and which is what like we've gone over a lot of times, and that's essentially I think what Kimberly Crenshaw was trying to say when she like coined intersectionality, was like, we all don't walk in the same world. Right, so even though you and I have the same identity of like, you know, race, gender, and class, that intersects differently for you than it does for me. We have like similar experiences, but you and I don't walk in the same world, which is crazy to think about and would be crazy to explain. I hope that they would stay to listen long enough for that. Okay, so next question. Describe the inequalities or privileges that you have faced and are currently facing.
Well, in terms of these three characteristics, I wouldn't say that I have faced inequalities or oppressions based on them. For my privileges, that it's also hard to describe, but that in and of itself is a privilege because I don't have to think about it all that much. Like I don't have to think about how much money I have on a daily basis. And I remember in my paper, I put that I had to ask myself whether I was middle or upper middle class, and just not having to think about that in and of itself is a privilege.
Right.
Now, in terms of my race and gender, I'm sure there have been ways that I've been treated differently throughout my life based on these things, but I wouldn't happen to know what kind of people might have unconsciously stepped on or over to get to where I am today, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. So, what do you see as points of similarities? I'll answer the third question for my privileges and inequalities.
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was about to answer, and then I was like, wait a second. I think I forgot something. Okay, so I would say for inequalities and privileges, I would say most of my paper focused on the privileges that I've experienced. And kind of similar to what you said, like, I've never really had to sit here and think, like, this is an inequality or this is, like, an oppression that I've faced. Although like, in terms of gender, I identify as a woman. There are people in class and there are people, you know, scholars and even Dr. Dorgan who have encountered certain oppressions as women. I've never personally encountered a lot of oppression, or maybe it's just like I haven't become aware of it yet. So I would say, and like me being a woman, I haven't really seen a lot of oppression. And I think part of that ties into, you know, because we're talking about having layers as a person. So like, I think that ties into my race and it ties into my socioeconomic status, like through my class, because I'm an upper middle class white woman.
Yeah, right.
I'm really on the generally pretty decent end of the spectrum. I'm able to, you know, I was talking about this in my paper. I can find a job pretty easily. And I can, you know, since I also have like the general American dialect, I have what, I think it's the Macintosh article that we did where it is the invisible knapsack. Like I don't even have to think, I can be invisible as a white person. Yeah. And then intersecting that with like me being, you know, white and female and upper middle class, I really don't have to think about myself in those terms all that much.
Yeah. I think I discussed something to this effect in my paper, but all of these individual characteristics sort of translate into trustworthiness within our society. Like how white people tend to be taken more seriously, or when you have more money, you tend to be seen as more responsible.
Right.
Now, I personally haven't witnessed that on a sex or gender kind of scale, but being trusted is generally what matters in our society, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Especially like, because it's easy for, it's like what we had discussed in class, like talking about going to apply for an apartment and like easily me and my sister and my brother and I applying for an apartment, easy. Like we're all white middle class, like male and female identifying people. And so it was very easy for us to apply. We bypassed so many people in the line because she said that they had a wait list, but once we applied, we just like cut right through.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but think like, how many other people did we bypass in order to like be able to apply for this program? Because it's the trustworthiness thing. They knew we would pay our rent, which I think partially was due to how we looked. Because there are professors who have tried to do the same thing, who are like foreign, and then they can't even apply for housing here. Yeah. Which is just awful. But yeah, I guess we can move on to the next question.
So as I was trying to say before, but what do you see as points of similarities across your social location?
That's kind of a difficult question to answer. I do think that like, I think that when I chose my social locations for this assignment, I tried to choose things that fit together well. And like, I keep doing this because I do feel like they stack on top of each other. Yes. So like I think my race would, if you were to look at my race and if you were to look at my gender and my socioeconomic status, you could just say, okay, like that makes sense. There's nothing that really like sticks out. It's like, yes, you are a white upper middle class female. And so I chose that because it would be easy to discuss in a paper as far as like these things are very, very distinct, but they all just fit together. And I think especially in terms of like gender and race, class and race, like middle class people, like we said, are typically white. So I think that those two are pretty similar. Yeah. What would you say about yourself?
Well, I find this question a little bit difficult to pin down because if you're talking about my social locations as individual characteristics, then sort of the point is that they're all different. But perhaps in terms of what privileges they afford me, that's where the similarities come in. Oh, yeah. So in terms of being white and being upper middle class, those individual characteristics sort of bring similar privileges, as we were talking about earlier with the trustworthiness thing.
Yeah, definitely. That totally like tied into that question. Like I like the way you put like the trustworthiness thing. Those are totally really similar. Okay, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I don't think I do.
Okay, cool. So last question. So imagine you're talking to a child. So first you're talking to an alien, then a child. What do you say about the importance of understanding yourself in terms of race, gender, and class?
Aren't aliens and children one and the same? But, I'm trying to think about this as if I was talking to myself as a child. And of course, as a child, these aren't really things that I thought about. There was no adult there to talk to me about understanding myself in these terms. But I think I would sort of say to that child, this, of course, it does depend on their characteristics of race, gender, and class. Let's say they were like me. Let's say they were white, male, upper middle class. I would sort of say, recognize your privileges. Don't live your life going around feeling that you're on top of the world and putting other people down in the process, if that makes sense. Yeah. And do you have anything? What would you say to this?
Honestly, I can think about it in terms of how we discussed it in class with the big academic terms of all the tenets of intersectionality and the leanings and stuff like that. I think having to explain it to a kid would be really hard. I would probably just, similar to what you said, just let them know that, I think the thing for me that's been most surprising is that there are so many things that I didn't realize were privileges until we started talking about intersectionality more, until we started studying it. And I think if I knew that from a younger age, I could have been a better advocate for other people, or I could have seen the ugly stuff that goes on in our country through a different lens. It's right. A really neat lens to look through. So I think if I were talking to a child, I would try and explain to them that, this is kind of depending on their age, which again, we don't know if we're talking about, like, I guess in terms of race, gender, and class, I would probably let them know, like, the importance of their skin color, the privileges that it affords them. I wouldn't want them to feel badly about how they were made or the class that they're in or the gender that they identify themselves by. Because I think that's kind of an easy thing to do.
Right.
I've kind of, at many points, felt really guilty for being able to get a job so easily or apply for housing so easily. So I want them to be aware of it, but also not to the point where they feel bad about themselves because they're white.
Right. And I think if I was talking to the child, I would very much, what's the word? Very much, I would very much implore them to not feel guilty about their social locations.
Right.
Like, I would want them to acknowledge how their social locations affect others, but I would want them to live their life normally. I wouldn't want them to sort of diminish their own selves for the sake of others.
Right, definitely, which is such an easy thing to do, especially when you see all the horrible inequality that goes on. Because once you find out about intersectionality, there's no going back, and you really see all the messed up stuff that goes on. But also, I think there's a lot of good that this has done. I'm glad that we're able to have discussions like this, and I'm glad that one day I will be able to probably talk to my child about their race, gender, and class, and how you can't really do a whole lot about where you're put, but you can do a lot to empower others and to call out, stuff when you see it, and inequalities when you see them, basically. Right. And like you said, not use your privilege to trample over others or to strut around with it just because you have it.
Exactly. But one thing that I have thought to myself is, does knowing these privileges, knowing how they affect others, does that almost in a way sort of perpetuate them? Because, of course, the end goal is to get as close to equality as we can. But does knowing that there is inequality almost perpetuate inequality?
Yeah, because like we said, once you know it, I mean, it's... See, I don't know. I mean, do you wish that you would have known about intersectionality at a younger age and, like, the effect of your, like, race, gender, and class? What you have that other people don't have?
But the scenario I imagine is, let's say that every single person in the world agreed to not talk to their children about inequality anymore. Would having that clean slate there almost sort of lead to a sort of equality?
Yeah, because they wouldn't be aware of it. I guess that would depend. Maybe this generation and who we decided with our knowledge about what's going on. I mean, I feel like we're kind of taking baby steps to move towards equality, proper equality. So that's such a big question to have to ask, honestly. It makes sense. Like, that would make sense, to not have to worry about that. Like, to just let people learn how to treat people the way that people should be treated instead of putting them in boxes.
And of course, in our modern society, since we're so connected to each other, there's hardly any unknowns, which I would wager is what caused original racism and all that stuff. Races first encountering each other and not knowing what each other would act like.
Right. Man. My brain's like... Okay, so I think that answers all the questions, and I believe we're out of time.
Yes, I believe that'll do it for us.